This is the presentation of behavioral economics. My name is Kim Chu-young. The title is Religion, Discrimination, and Trust Across Three Cultures, written by Swee-hoon Chua and published in the European Economic Review. Economics and religion, rationality and faith seems to be unrelated to each other at first glance. However, apart from religious or cultural conflicts all over the world, high religiosity can generate positive or negative externalities, such as terrorism, gay rights, or vaccine hesitancy. From economic point of view, religion can influence people's economic behavior in two ways. First, creating different social group identities. Second, through individual differences in religiosity, such as the strength of an individual's religious attachment or commitment to a particular faith. Some previous studies demonstrated the first effect, but researchers failed to demonstrate directly the second effect of religiosity. In this paper, religious identities serve as cues on the nature and degree of connectedness between interacting individuals, and thus religion influences strategic behavior, in particular trust and trustworthiness, on which we focus here. We call closeness and religion-based relationships religious connectedness. This increases with the duration and frequency of interactions, knowledge of others, the extent of self-disclosure, and the number of people in the other's network one is also connected to. There are four forms of religious identity. First, a connection at the fundamental level of individual religiosity. Second, group membership based on religious affiliation to the same creed. Third, religious affinity arising from the mere affiliation to some religion, regardless of creed. Fourth, religious anonymity, where religiosity effects operate on the wider societal level of prejudice across social identities, including non-religious ones. Experiment results will be used to test the following four hypotheses. First, statistical discrimination, which means people generally believe that highly religious people are trustworthier and statistically discriminate by being more likely to trust them more than people with no or lower religiosity. Second, in-group love. Religiously affiliated people are more likely to invest trust in others who are affiliated to the same religion relative to others who are not religiously affiliated or affiliated to a different religion. Third, religious affinity. Religiously affiliated people are more likely to invest trust in others who are affiliated to some religion. This effect increases with people's religiosity. Fourth, general prejudice. Religious people are generally more biased, such that they are more likely to trust others with the same non-religious social identity. Experiments were conducted in China, Malaysia, and UK, and mainly consist of extended binary trust game. In normal trust game, a sender decides how much to trust the receiver by sending an amount of money. The receiver receives thrice the amount sent and decides how trustworthy to be in returning a proportion of it. In equilibrium, by backward induction, assuming that receivers are rational and money maximizing, senders anticipate nothing in return and so send nothing. In extended trust game, participants can incur a financial cost in order to discriminate between co-participants of different religions and other social identities additionally. Participants' intention or willingness to discriminate can be measured by this financial cost. There are two games and two players in this picture, which are low and high stake game, and sender and receiver. Both players start with 200 points. In low stake game, the sender decides whether to trust. Let's say they decide to send 50 or 0 to the receiver. If the sender sends the money, the receiver receives 150 and decides whether to be trustworthy by returning 100 or 0. The point increases 3 times in high stake game, and numbers at the bottom shows the payoffs of each player's decision. To obtain measures of discrimination, strategy method was installed to the trust game. To keep the sender and receiver task symmetric, receivers are allowed to choose return or not return in the experiment under the understanding that the decision only applies if the sender had chosen send. In practice, the sender's decision would not influence payoffs in the game if the sender does not send any money. To make this clear, games are displayed on the screen as extensive form representations consistent with this strategy method setup. In the first 2 rounds of the experiment, all senders and receivers stated their decision of whether to send or not to send without knowing the social identities of their co-participants. One round was for the high-stake condition and the other the low-stake condition in counterbalanced orders across participants. This is called default action. In the other rounds, participants stated their decision based on every possible co-participant's social identity type according to different social categories. Using religious affiliation as an example of a category, every participant was asked whether they would send or not send to co-participants of every religious affiliation, such as Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, Jewish, Muslim, or none. This process was repeated for every type of every category, presented in random order after the tasks without social identity were performed. This is called conditional action. In each round, participants were provided with an additional endowment of 100 points from which they could spend an amount of their choice to increase the probability of implementing their conditional action instead of their default action. Each point increases the probability by 1%, and points unspent were given as experimental payoffs. This incentive compatibly elicits their willingness to discriminate. In summary, we test how much senders invest trust or receivers reciprocate trust, and we also test whether these beliefs and actions relate to the religiosity and religious affiliation of sender and receiver. Senders spent an average of 21.4 and receivers 22 out of 100 points to increase the probability of implementing their conditional actions in the religious affiliation condition. And willingness rises with one's religiosity level at 19, 21, and 30 for low, medium, and high religiosity respectively. Senders spent an average of 20.9 and receivers 20 points in the religiosity condition, and willingness rises with one's religiosity level at 19.8, 19.9, and 26 for low, medium, and high religiosity respectively. And result 1, statistical discrimination. Senders of all levels of religiosity believe that receivers of higher religiosity are trustworthier and behave consistently with this belief by trusting them more. Senders of diverse religiosities believe that receivers of higher religiosity are more likely to return, which is top left figure, and are more likely to send to them, which is top right. Receivers of diverse religiosities believe that senders of higher religiosity are more likely to trust, which is bottom left, and are as likely to return to senders of different religiosity level, which is bottom right. And result 2, in-group love. Religiosity enhances the in-group favoritism shown by senders toward receivers of the same religious affiliation. This effect is driven by people with religious affiliations. In UK and Malaysia, where most participants have religious affiliations, there were increases in trust for the in-group relative to the baseline, that is, in-group favoritism. In China, where most participants are atheists, there were decreases in trust for the outgroup relative to the baseline, and that is outgroup prejudice. On the other hand, atheists discriminate on ethnicity, which can be proxied by religious affiliation. Result 3, religious affinity. Senders' religiosity enhances beliefs about religiously affiliated receivers' trustworthiness, regardless of whether they belong to the same denomination, but they do not invest more trust despite this belief. Result 1 suggests this, but a stricter test involves data from the religious affiliation condition, where there is a clear classification of social identity for self and other. This test distinguishes itself from previous ones in that it considers the possibility that people trust each other more so long as they both have some religious affiliation, even if they are of different religious denominations. And this picture plots the linear fit of senders' beliefs in the trustworthiness of the receiver as a function of a sender's religiosity in the absence, left, or the presence, right, of religious affinity. Result 4, general prejudice. Religiosity is positively associated with the general willingness of senders to discriminate across a range of non-religious social identities. However, participants of different religiosity are as prone to in-group favoritism. Hypothesis 4 assumes that more religious people discriminate more over a range of social identities, including non-religious ones. And the picture shows that both religious affiliates and atheists generally favor the in-group over the out-group by trusting the in-group more across different categories of social identity. The main findings can be summarized as follows. Number 1, religiosity is a strong social identifier which is used as a basis of statistical discrimination by senders of varying religiosities. Both religious and non-religious people believe that more religious others are more trustworthy. Number 2, religiosity enhances the in-group favoritism people show to others who share the same faith. Senders of all religion believe receivers of the same faith to be more trustworthy and follow this belief with actions in step with their own degree of religiosity. And number 3, religious fellow feeling or affinity between religious people across different faiths were found, irrespective of whether they share the same one or not. This was expressed in the greater belief people with religious affiliation have in the trustworthiness of others similarly affiliated. As before, Individual religiosity amplifies this effect. This kind of religious affinity, however, does not generate quite the same positive effect on actual behavior. And number 4, while religiosity is associated with a willingness to discriminate across non-religious categories, observed in group favoritism did not vary with religiosity. In conclusion, there was an evidence that religion operates indirectly through social identities and religious affiliation, which are used as a basis for discrimination in trust games. Religious identity informs decision makers how they are connected to those with whom they interact. The nature and degree of discrimination observed generally depended on the nature and degree of connectedness between individuals. The behavioral patterns we observed across the 4 main results show that the closer people are, the more they trust each other. Religious in-group effects on beliefs carry over strongly to actions, in contrast to the weaker effect when religiosity was known but religious affiliation was unknown, and when religious affiliation was known to be of different creed. These effects increased with one's religiosity, which is an indicator of how rooted one is in a particular social group. And this is the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening.